moments of extraordinary strength, skill, and determination. True greatness is forged by those who fulfill their destiny.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered on Past the Wire TV. As you can see, John Stetton is not with us this week. He is still in Florida and has no power and no water. So we're hoping that everything gets back. But you've seen his work with the camera. You have not seen him in front of the camera. We have, as our special guest this week, who's going to be co-hosting with me, Jim Gazzale. And he is one of the gentlemen who tends to put out all the great videos that we do with Past the Wire TV, as well as all of the graphics that we do with our shows. So if you ever need a guy who can do some phenomenal video or really good graphics, well, now you can put a name to the face. So welcome, Jim. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, excited to break my maiden on Past the Wire TV. So this is should be exciting. Thanks for having me.
No, it's awesome. I mean, it's always a pleasure chatting with you since you have such an interest in the game and you just have such good skills behind the camera that it's hard to get you to then stand in front of it too. So glad we're finally getting this opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, so what we're going to talk about this week, we want to try and keep the show relaxed and interesting. Typically on Unfiltered, we target one topic, and maybe it's because of my ADHD, we're going to make this a little bit more meandering. But one of the first things that we wanted to talk about, especially with the Breeders' Cup coming up and all these championship races that we have going forward in the next month or so, is what happens with some of our 3-year-olds, and are they going to be around next year? And what does that do for racing in general? So Jim, you were curious about that, wanted to discuss it. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, as somebody who's, a relative outsider to horse racing, just kind of looking at it from a fan's perspective, I always feel a little bit, drawing the short straw when we develop this fandom, almost like a rooting relationship with horses. Maybe starting from now, this time of year as they go through the fall and then in their 2-year-old year, and then start their 3-year-old season in the spring, and we follow them through the Triple Crown, and they make it to the Kentucky Derby, and then we never hear from them again. And then, they pop up on, some website that they've been sold off to stud, or, maybe we're lucky enough to see them run through the summer, and then at the end of their 3-year-old campaign, that's all she wrote. So it's a little disappointing, this year when you see early voting, Mo Donegal, 2 of the 3 Triple Crown winners that have been retired now. And, like I said, from an outsider's perspective, I'm always just curious, why is that? Why do we get, I don't know, 14 months, 16 months, maybe if we're lucky to follow a good horse's trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing that I've always had a sticking point with, right? And the way I liken it is we see these high school phenoms in basketball, and then they go to college and they're one and done. Now, most of them end up in the NBA, but it literally be, if we looked at our sport as a sport, it literally be high school phenom, 1 year, one and you're done, and that's it, right? We don't get to ever see him play again. We don't ever get to see him progress. And I understand the financial incentives in racing, and I also understand mapping of careers and how that looks and works in terms of maximizing a horse's value. Now, personally, and I don't know, and I can't keep up with all of our news in racing because I don't have enough time in the day. There's always something new that's going on in our sport. But I don't know if they retired because they had an injury or if they retired because they just retired. Personally, looking at these 2 horses, they would not have been horses based on their career and where it finished that I would have retired at this point in the season. I think their last several starts, particularly early voting, is going to hurt him in the breeding shed when it comes to getting the mares that he might need. Now, he's the son of gun runner. he has a phenomenal pedigree. I mean, it's really, really a very beautiful pedigree. So from that standpoint, and from what I've heard of him as a physical and what he looked like as a yearling, he might be a horse that doesn't need help in the breeding shed in terms of getting mares to him. But I saw this very much with Into Mischief when I worked with Into Mischief. And Into Mischief fell into a very interesting category. He was a 2-year-old with a lot of talent, and he came out and won the Cash Coffee Charity. Then he had a minor injury, which put him away for a significant chunk of the year. And then we had him at Del Mar, and we were getting him ready. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Hughes had purchased Spendthrift Farm and wanted to build a stallion roster. And so Into Mischief finally was ready to make his comeback on the Breeders' Cup Day. And Richard is a very conservative individual, and so put him in a undercard race versus a Breeders' Cup race, right? You've got this grade 1 winning 2-year-old that hasn't run for a season. We knew how talented he was, but throw him to the wolves as a 3-year-old and say you're going against the Breeders' Cup horses didn't make a whole lot of sense. So he won the Damascus and won it impressively. And then he went into the Malibu, and I believe he finished second, and then he was retired. So here you have a grade 1 winning 2-year-old. And at that point, you hadn't had Leslie's Lady, his dam, had not taken off as a broodmare prospect, quote unquote. Into Mischief was her first big hit, followed up by Beholder, then followed by Mendelssohn. So he goes to stud and he's standing for 5,000, I think. And they had trouble hustling mares to him. And so a lot of it, Jim, which I agree. I think for the health of our overall sport, and I know, and this is going to be a topic we might jump into next, of handle, right? A lot of people determine handle is the health of our sport. Well, if somebody just has more discretionary income to gamble with versus, and you have more avid bettors of our sport versus more as a whole, horse racing actually has the opportunity, and we tend to look at it as a sport as a two-way street, really. Money comes in through purchases of horses, and money comes in through gambling, and that's it. And if we look at our sport as a sport versus just something to gamble on, fans could be capitalized through multiple different aspects of creating economies around it, whether it's merchandise, whether it's fan experiences, whether it's, the multitude of things we provide in other professional sports that we don't do in horse racing. It would benefit the entire industry as a whole if we kept our top athletes around. Yeah,
the injury aspect is interesting to me too, because we know Mo Donegal had an injury coming out of the Belmont, which is why he hasn't run since, and then was since announced that he was going to retire. I don't know what the deal is with early voting, but his last 2 starts weren't all that great coming out of the Preakness, so who knows? But in your past experience, what would be like an injury that would be severe enough, or for lack of a better term, disabling enough that it would make sense to retire a 3-year-old rather than put the time and effort to work through that injury, train them back into form, and then have them hit the racetrack at 4 years old? What would be something that, in your opinion, would warrant an early retirement, let's say?
So number one would be a broken sesamoid. Those are you don't come back from those typically. The other would be a torn suspensory branch. And then the one that would be higher up on the list but is not career ending would be a bowed tendon, but severity of the bow is the biggest question. And there is a misnomer in racing that once a horse is bowed, it's forever bowed. There's a lot of horses that come back from bowed tendons and they're absolutely fine. So severity is a big deal on how bad that bowed tendon looks. Most other things, most bone injuries. Now, you do have some fractures in knees that can be problematic. Condylar fractures, depending, a lot of those heal up and those horses are fine. So it comes down to, and again, in all of this, it's people are weighing out final proceeds for horses versus, and that's potentially where stud deals maybe should look in the future of saying, this is how much we'll put forth now for the horse. And then these are the kickers if he performs at 4 and continues to do well. we'll give you X amount for the completion of this horse's career. Now, the issue with that is they want to make income as soon as possible by having that horse standing in a stall in the breeding shed. So it doesn't behoove the breeding farms to necessarily say, we're going to give you an extension unless they believe that that horse is going to continually increase in value as a 4-year-old by winning more races. So you'll have certain situations where, let's say, a prime example would be Epicenter would be a very good example. Okay. Epicenter could win the Breeders' Cup Classic, and he's at his career height of what he'll be valued at. He could come back and win every race as a 4-year-old, every grade 1 on the map, and win the Breeders' Cup again, and his value as a stallion in the breeding shed won't change. It'll pretty much stay very stable, whereas if he was to win the Breeders' Cup Classic and retire this year. So it literally comes down more to the owners saying, you know what, and Ronis Racing, and I take my hat off to him, here you have a 4-year-old who obviously does have things that set him back in Flightline, who said, I want to run him at 5. Now, he did say and qualify that by saying, I have to check with the rest of the group to see if they're good with running him at 5. But he's like, I'm here to race horses. I want to run this horse at 5. It's good for the fans. It's good for the sport. Why not keep him around? So he is, in fact, actually a horse that it would benefit, right? So if he wins the Breeders' Cup Classic, he, to me personally, and I know everybody's crowning him the greatest horse of all time, and I don't think he merits that yet. I think he's a very good horse, the best right now, but I don't think he qualifies as greatest ever by any means necessary. If he was to win the Breeders' Cup Classic, come back and win every grade 1 on the map and duplicate it, okay, then you can have that conversation. But that also bolsters how much he is worth now as a stallion, because he's won some races and he won the Pacific Classic, and that's a great grade 1. And the Breeders' Cup Classic is another one, but his body of work isn't as significant as others where you could say, hey, look, this is what he's worth. He can continue to go up in value and could potentially be a horse that, if he won the Breeders' Cup Classic and continued onwards and knocked out a bunch of grade 1s as a 5-year-old and even capped that off with another classic win, you could be looking at a horse that retires to the breeding shed at the same stud fee as like a Justify or a Triple Crown winner and going to the shed and standing for 200,000 plus. I think if he wins the Classic this year, if they were to ask me to pay that for him, I would not. As a guy who manages horses and mares, I'd say I'll give you 125, maybe 150, but I'm not going to give you 200,000 for a horse that had a spotty career and knocked out some grade 1s. I want to see more from him to merit what you're going to charge me in the breeding shed.
So why would that be so different in Flightline's case as opposed to Epicenter's case, where Epicenter, let's just say, wins the Breeders' Cup Classic next month, and you said that that's as high as his career will get from a stud fee, even if he came back at 4 and went undefeated in his 4-year-old season and won the Breeders' Cup Classic again. Why the disparity between the two?
I think part of it for him is we know what he is. Everybody's known all year that Epicenter is probably the best 3-year-old in the class. And there were certain races that didn't go his way, pace scenarios, and different things that got him beat in different spots. But, when he faced, and minus, you didn't have Taiba in the race, and you didn't have, Cyberknife did run on the Travers, but you didn't have Taiba in the Travers. So that would be the only 3-year-old in the country that I could say could potentially beat Epicenter. So he's pretty much top of the class at the moment. So with that being said, and you could say the same for Flightline. People could say, well, Flightline's top of the 4-year-old class, and he very well could be. Actually, he is. I will say that because everybody loves to give me shit that I don't say Flightline is the greatest horse of all time. So he is the top of the class right now. But we've seen Epicenter enough that I think when he retires, he would have a much better shot at commanding the stud fee that he deserves than Flightline would. In my personal opinion, I don't set the market values. I just look at it from, if you retired Epicenter after the Breeders' Cup Classic and you stood him for 100,000, maybe 125. Would I breed to him? I'd definitely consider it, because he's proven it time and time and time and time again that he is that caliber of horse. With that as well, again, and somebody said, well, why wouldn't you say he's worth 200,000 like a flight line? He's a great racehorse. He's a very good racehorse. The 3-year-old class this year, I could liken to being one of the best 3-year-old crops we've seen in a long time, both fillies and boys, with Nest. And, obviously she has not performed as the year has progressed in, God help me, Wayne Lucas's filly.
Secret Oath.
Secret Oath. Yeah, I was going to say Secret Square, but that was a different horse I worked with. So, with Secret Oath and Nest, those are two phenomenal fillies. Nest is in a whole different category of her own. But if you were to take that and the previous crop that you could kind of have this conversation about really was back Curlin, Street Sense, Rags to Riches, Hard Spun. And then in that crop, which not a whole lot of people realize, who was also from that crop, was Zenyatta. She didn't come out until she was 4, but she was born in that same full crop years, right? So when you look at these 3-year-old boys, Curlin was a superstar. Street Sense was a superstar. So was Hard Spun. Hard Spun is a horse that, obviously he won the King's Bishop when it was named that, and then could also stretch that to the 1.5 miles. I mean, he ran 3rd in the Belmont Stakes. So he was a substantial horse that, minus Street Sense and minus Curlin, that horse wins derbies, wins Preaknesses. He's a different caliber. But you throw Street Sense in the mix, who was champion 2-year-old, loved Churchill Downs, and ran a phenomenal race in the Derby. And then he also won the Travers. And then here comes Curlin. Curlin shows up and he wins the Preakness. And then he gets beat by Rags to Riches in the Belmont. But then he progresses into a monster of an older horse. So we haven't had a crop like that in a long time. And for a lot of years, and I might get a lot of backlash for this, and I trained for them as clients, Zayat Stables. I remember when American Pharoah was around, and I was at the Belmont when he won the Triple Crown. And I was so happy we had a Triple Crown winner. But it was such a soft group that he beat in that 3-year-old crop. There was nobody in that crop, really. And then he takes on the older boys in the Breeders' Cup Classic here at Keeneland, and who's the horse that runs second to him? FNX, I think. Like the race really didn't have a whole lot in it. Yeah. So you look at that. You look at Justify as a Triple Crown winner. He ran against some very good horses, right? Bolt d'Oro was in that group. But there you go. I can't remember anybody else in that group that jumps to mind that's from Justify's crop. So this group, you take out any one of these 3-year-olds. You take out Epicenter. You take Cyberknife. You take Taiba. You take, even if you remove those 3, Zandon jumps way up in that crop. So it's a substantial group of 3-year-old boys. And most of us realize that. So to me, the only thing you do by going into a 4-year-old year with Epicenter, which I hope they keep him around, is potentially diminish his value if he does not run up. And when you look at this horse, when he was in the paddock at the Travers, he was a different animal compared to the rest of the horses in the race. So, and he ran like it that day too. So that's where the disparity would come in. Now, the 4-year-old group, again, this is a very good group, right? If you take out Flightline, Life is Good as a phenomenal racehorse. And then you back that one up. And I still think Country Grammar is a very good horse, but Bob Baffert's now thrown in another horse to fund it into the group. So the 4-year-old group is substantial as well, but this is a group of 3-year-olds that could potentially, when they meet these older boys, give them a run for their money.
Yeah, I've always been a little partial to Frosted from that 2015 3-year-old crop.
With American Pharoah. Yeah, and he's a very good horse.
He had a decent 4-year-old campaign. He ran off in the Met Mile and had a nice win in the Whitney. So, but to your point, when you look at it during their 3-year-old year in 2015, yeah, American Pharoah really kind of towered over everybody else, and then kind of found probably one of the softer Breeders' Cup Classics in recent memory, definitely.
Well, but you can now say, that crop's now shown it's proven itself, because Keen Ice has sired a Derby winner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and a lot of it, it's interesting, and people tend to look at racing maybe differently than I do. And I look at it, some of my strengths are being able to look at a horse and assess talent very quickly. And so I can watch a horse in a race and say, the horse ran a really good race. He's going to get even better next time. Or, the horses he beat, I don't even need to half the time look at numbers and look at rag numbers or what type of figure did the horse run. I've been lucky to be around 40 plus grade one winners. So when I see an impressive horse, I know it was impressive. And when I see a group that he only beat by half a length, then you say, wow, this is a really substantial group. So some people might look at numbers and figures and try and throw that into the mix and how they evaluate. When it comes to the big days in racing, for me, I've always done well figuring out who's going to win these races on Breeders' Cup Day, who's going to show up in certain spots. And a lot of that is just understanding talent assessment. So, when you look across the board, this is a substantially talented group. And yeah, I really hope some of them stick around. I'd love some not to, because, hopefully I have a horse that's going to be contesting in that division next year, as a 4-year-old. But it would not be it's a salty group for sure with these younger boys, and the older boys are not going to make it any easier in the classic. So
yeah, speaking of Keen Ice siring a Kentucky Derby winner, Rich Strike, making some more headlines over the weekend with his second place finish in the Lukas Classic down at Churchill. Two bits of controversy coming out of that race with Sonny Leon, the rider, saying that his saddle slipped, and that's why he gave a couple of elbows to the ribs of Tyler Gafflione as Hot Rod Charlie passed him in deep stretch. And then a photo coming out yesterday or the day before that Hot Rod Charlie was wearing some illegal horseshoes, apparently. Your expertise would probably know more about that angle than I sure as heck would. So let's start with Rich Strike and Sonny Leon. What was your take on that whole debacle, we'll call it?
Well, it's fantastic to see Rich Strike. Watching him in the Derby and then watching him train up the Preakness and physically looking at what type of horse he is. I think he's a substantial horse. I didn't think he was a fluke. I was hoping he'd continue on in the group and continue to prove himself. And, correct me if I'm wrong. I think he ran fourth in the Traverse.
Yeah, but it was basically, a head away from second. So, flip a coin and he's second or fourth.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at him and he's starting to prove his body of work, and that he is, a Derby winner that really needs to be talked about, because, is Hot Rod Charlie's been a tough luck horse. In my opinion, he's a very, very good horse. And I think Flavien Prat's a great jockey. I'm not knocking Prat, but I don't think Prat has ever fit Hot Rod Charlie. I think Hot Rod Charlie has been at the mercy of Prat's decisions over most of his career. Now you go to Gafflione and the horse finally gets up and wins a race. So, but when you look at it, it was a great race and it was good race riding, but Sonny Leon did come in. And then when you do see that head on, and you can bullshit saddle slipped all you want, but you don't normally, it's not just elbowing. If you look at what he was trying to do, he has his elbow in and he's cocked his knee out to the left. And that's not normally a move you do when you're trying to grip with your toes, because what people don't understand about jockeys, their feet aren't all the way on the irons. They're typically gripping with their toes on the sides of the irons. And so if you're to move your knee out, you're removing your point of balance in the irons. So what he did was very much deliberate in trying to fight out to hopefully get a win with this horse. So, the one thing is, and it's the fantastic thing about our sport now with media and the fact that we're now moving, though it's 2022, horse racing is finally getting into the 21st century with better use of cameras and better use of video. Just as you and I are doing now, Jim, with doing a show and podcast stuff, heck, in the real world, which is interesting, some people live in the racing world and they never walk out that door and see what's going on outside. Podcasting has been around forever. We're just very late to the game. So seeing now, though, you can find all this evidence of potential wrongdoing. And last week was a substantial week of wrongdoing by jockeys between Christophe Soumillon, who, again, your reaction.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I don't know. You expect to kind of, well, I shouldn't say you expect to see that in other places, but, in some, maybe some bush tracks around the world, that might be something that wouldn't be so terribly surprising. But for one of the best riders in the world to purposefully dump another rider like that, I mean, that was pretty nuts.
Well, what's interesting is, and Rasa Ryan, he rides for a client of ours, Ammo Racing, and was their retained jockey. And Ammo came out and said, the penalty wasn't stiff enough for Soumillon, which I 100% agree. But if you look at Soumillon and what he's claiming, well, I was trying to maintain position or save room. His horse stayed in the right line. His horse didn't move. He moved. And so the fact that Rasa Ryan then didn't say anything negative about Soumillon makes me think that maybe there's something else going behind the scenes that neither of them want to let brought to light. Potentially something that happened in the jocks room, or potentially something in their personal lives with the two of them. Who knows? But that stuff just doesn't happen on the racetrack when you're race riding. Now, what Sonny Leon did, and I mentioned it in the show where we were talking about pilots and passengers with John on jockeys. And I said, Sonny Leon, if you put him on a better circuit where he can learn from better riders around him, I think has the talent to go to the next level. Well, you can certainly see with his quote unquote saddle slipping and fighting to a finish, his balance is perfectly fine to lean, elbow, and try and take his knee to knock Gafflione's knee out of the iron. So the guy's got some ability and athleticism in the saddle. And all you got to do is look at the reaction of Gafflione as soon as he hit the finish, of standing up and looking back at Sonny Leon and like, what the fuck, dude? Like, what are you doing here? And then, so I think there's a lot of it. Now, obviously, to me, it's poor sportsmanship what Rich Strike's group is now doing in terms of going after and saying, hey, there was illegal shoes on Hot Rod Charlie. Now, if you look at the photos from certain angles, it does look like there is a chance for a toe grab. Now, what is very interesting, though, and this is what I will point out, when you look at a horseshoe, when you look at a horse, there's going to be a flat barrier. The toe grab sits about here. Okay. If you look at the front shot of that shoe, there's this weird half moon. Okay. And then you'll see a toe grab. Unless that horse was not shod for about a month, there is no reason why you're going to have a half moon of steel, which is the toe grab, showing. Shoes are not built like that. There's no horse racing shoe built like that. So my first question is this photoshopped? Because that is not how a toe grab. Yes, a toe grab on a shoe is you have an aluminum plate with a steel piece embedded in it, and the aluminum is welded around that. But to get that half moon thing, it literally comes from wear on the toe of a horseshoe. And you have to have pretty substantial wear to get back to that steel portion where that toe grab actually is.
Yeah, that was the big topic of conversation on horse racing Twitter today. It was about the potential of this photo being photoshopped. I saw Doug O'Neill's, the trainer of Hot Rod Charlie. I saw his statement that he put out yesterday or the day before, basically saying there's no way that this is the shoe had a toe grab on it. He was referred to some scientific studies that they've been following for the last, 10, 20 years, and they haven't used them for that reason. Apparently they have negative effects on, the horse's limb structure and limb health. So, for me, that seemed like all I needed to really know and read to, kind of chalk it up as, Sonny Leon brought some attention on, and maybe the owners there or the trainer there is trying to deflect some of that negative publicity.
Well, and part of it is, to get 100% clarity, Doug should just let people go in his barn and photograph the rest of his horses. And let's see if there are no toe grabs. Now, I do know the shoeing rules in California, and I do understand that, grabs in front, you can't use grabs in front in California anymore. You can use grabs behind, but there's a certain level that you're allowed to use. So yes, more than likely on his home track in California, Doug O'Neill does not use toe grabs. Okay. Would I say that he would carry that policy to Kentucky? The one thing I've learned about this game is, so going back to the study, yes. So toe grabs, how a horse lands when they run, is when they land, you're worried about if the horse is going to land flat and not torque anything, right? Toe grabs can kind of stop forward momentum slide in dirt. Sometimes they can tilt one way and wrench something, or it changes how they land, how their hoof is naturally structured. It creates another barrier for breakover in their stride. So it does, yes, the studies which are done by Dr. Sue Stover, who is at UC Davis and is with HISA and has made a lot of these shoeing recommendations for HISA to institute for racehorses for limb health. The studies are conclusive in that matter. Now, it's very interesting, and I agree with the stance that HISA took to say, well, we're going to alter our rule of no traction devices and just say, well, no traction devices in front. You can use traction devices behind, because in certain jurisdictions and parts of the country, and especially in wet conditions, right? So if you don't have a traction device when you run on a sloppy track, you're asking for an issue in a horse. And so they need, it's something that I brought up in a conversation once, saying, look, if you don't have any traction devices and it rains, are you just going to cancel racing at Saratoga every day? Are you going to cancel racing when it rains at Keeneland or Churchill? Because they're not going to cancel if it's raining. So you need to at least make sure these horses have enough traction, just as another athlete would on any type of wet surface in any other sport, to make sure that there's not accidental injuries, because from an overall standpoint, you're trying to raise the level of equine welfare. The horses living in toe grabs, I've never agreed with. I do think, the hoof is built in a certain capacity, which then sets up the pastern to stand at a certain angle. And when you have a toe grab on, it doesn't allow that. So to have horses in stalls all day with traction devices 24/7 for months at a time is to me not in a horse's best interest. So kudos that they changed the shoeing rule to no grabs in front, but you can have traction devices behind. Look, with what Doug says, I would say dig further, see if it's real. But granted, the horse is probably back in California, and, unless he's still here in Kentucky, but go to the barn and take a look at the shoes and see. Maybe he's changed them in the last couple of days to make sure that if there was an issue that nobody sees the issue. But to me, it didn't look like a real photo of a shoe with a toe grab, but that's just my take on it.
The plot thickens, I guess.
Yeah, but this is the problem in our sport nowadays, Jim, and it's really frustrating. Sportsmanship has gone out the window in a lot of situations, right? Everybody wants to contest everything. Everyone, and part of it, and yes, I worked for him, and somebody slammed me the other day saying, hey, you work for Baffert. Yeah, I was 22, man. Like, you don't know. You never worked for somebody that had anything bad happen to him. But, looking at it from, where was I going with this? We were talking about sportsmanship, right? So going back to Baffert adjudicating everything has now opened up a terrible door where everybody wants to contest finishes of races and file lawsuits and try and overturn, and a lot of it really started in two places. It first started with Justify testing positive for scopolamine in the Santa Anita Derby, and Bolt d'Oro's owner basically saying, well, hell, if he tested positive, he should be disqualified. We should get the purse. Which, yes, in that scenario, and I get it, environmental contaminant, and it's not, but a positive is a positive. And so that then opened that door. And then Baffert trying to continuously, the Medina Spirit Camp, continuously trying to get the Kentucky Derby results overturned and this stuff. You use an ointment that had a medication in it that is not allowed on race day. It doesn't matter what a derivative of that medication is. Any horseman and any trainer in racing knows you do not use Automax, which is what they were using. It's also known as Panalog. There's two different names for it. You don't use it within 5 days of a race because it will test positive. So when you start adjudicating all of this, anytime now that there's something questionable, instead of just taking your hat off and saying, the better horse won today, I think it's ridiculous that people are filing all these lawsuits to try and win purse money that they would have lost. Just congratulate Hot Rod Charlie. He hasn't won a race in forever. He finally won a race. Let him have his friggin' day.
Yeah, I know. He to his credit, Hot Rod Charlie shows up, runs his race, and just for whatever reason hasn't been good enough to win. But that effort the other day was pretty impressive to watch him lose the lead and then gain it right back. That was that's as exciting as horse racing gets, really.
Exactly. And I mean, I know the owners, they're great, wonderful people. And I'm just really happy for them that they finally got that win. And it's great. And I think we all need to turn the page and move on, because what tends to happen is somebody wants to point the finger at somebody. And then the next thing is they point the finger back at you. And then it's this vicious cycle that it ruins the sport overall. So I'm hoping as HISA comes in that there are straight line rules for everything going forward, saying, hey, look, this happens. And that was the whole goal with some of these things of, oh, you had a medication positive as a trainer, you're banned. Oh, you had this happen, you're banned. I mean, not to get in the weeds on this, but John and I talked about on a different show about Jamie Nest having a positive for a really bad substance, or that he was caught with a certain substance in his barn. I don't know if he had the positive, but Jamie Ness still running horses. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, why are we not taking these rules and just saying, in the NBA, Ron Artest runs into the stands and punches a fan. He is going to be benched and kicked out of the NBA for a substantial amount of time. It's done. There's no Ron Artest says, well, I got hit with a soda cup, so I'm actually going to sue the guy so I can keep playing in games because I didn't instigate it. That was not my problem. No, the rule is the rule. You assaulted a fan, you're out. And somebody can say, well, this is no different than assaulting. Fine, let's go to a different sport. Let's say all of a sudden we find out that Patrick Mahomes is taking steroids. You think they're going to let him play in the Super Bowl because he accidentally was contaminated by somebody else?
Yeah. Well, I think it kind of gets into the whole debate. The NBA is single sort of jurisdiction that oversees 32 teams. There is no like one singular governing body in horse racing. Every state has its own rules. They have their own regulations. They got their own financial thing to look after. So it does get a little hairy when you're kind of crossing state lines like that. But I agree with what you're saying. The rule changes from one state to the next does make it a heck of a lot more complicated and a heck of a lot more challenging to sort of keep everything even, I guess, and so people can kind of know what's going on. It's interesting too about this lawsuit or that lawsuit, and this thing going on or that thing going on. You hear a lot of people say, oh, another black eye for horse racing. And maybe it is. Horse racing fans like, oh, we need to do more to get horse racing into the mainstream. And anytime a larger national or international media outlet is covering horse racing, it's always a negative story. But the bettors continue to show up, the handle continues to increase, and the people at the top crunching the numbers, they look to that handle as a sign of positive life in the horse racing industry. In your perspective and in your experience, what other metrics are there that we should be looking at and focused on that would suggest a more truer depiction of the vitality of horse racing moving forward, do you think?
Well, I think part of it, right, and let's be real here. Nobody outside of horse racing will have any idea that there is an issue with Simeone, that there is an issue with Sonny Leon, and that there is a shoeing issue with Hot Rod Charlie. So I can give all of us in horse racing two very interesting stories. Both have to do with one of my places that I love to shop, which you might see me in one day, Trader Joe's. Okay. So I was in Trader Joe's at Santa Anita one day, and I'm pushing my shopping cart, and all of a sudden I go to check out, and they say, "Gosh, you really like fruit." I said, "Yeah, I like a good amount of fruit." They say, "You eat a lot of carrots." I said, "Well, those aren't for me." And they said, "Well, you have like 6 papayas too." I said, "Yeah, those aren't for me either." I said, "Those are for my horses." They said, "Horses?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "That's interesting. Where do you keep your horses?" I said, 2 blocks down the road at Santa Anita Park." They said, "They have horses here?" I said, "Yeah, there's a racetrack 2 blocks down the road, one of the best in the country." And the person working at Trader Joe's had no clue. So that's literally how important we are. And second story, I'm in Lexington and shopping, the home and center of horse racing, as people would love to call Lexington, which I will say it's the center of United States horse racing. All of our horses are bred here, but it's not the center of the universe for horse racing. But I'm in Lexington shopping again, and somebody says, "What do you do?" "Oh, I work in the thoroughbred industry." "Well, that's cool. They have thoroughbreds around here, yeah?" I said, "Yeah, they've got quite a few of them." They said, "Huh, where are they?" I said, "Well, there's farms out that way, and there's a racetrack that way." I'm like, wow, center of horse racing, and the guy working at Trader Joe's in Lexington has no clue where the thoroughbreds in town actually live. So in the larger scheme, Jim, you just said it. We are not important. We are not even on the blip of anybody's radar outside of our own little world of horse racing. So I think the biggest thing to look at how we judge our sport as a whole is viewership, right? Social media, how many followers you have, how many views you get per video. You have all those different metrics that you can gauge how relevant you are in modern society, right? So when it comes to handle can come from multiple different places. Somebody can bet more. So, yes, we might have new people coming and betting at the racetrack. You might have an average fan who's never been to the racetrack and went once and bet all his money, lost all his money, and never shows up again. So I think there's several metrics. A, viewership on television. What's our viewership like? And I can tell you, when I look at some of these TV deals that are done, when FanDuel bought TVG, was not a very big deal for a media company, right? So obviously there's not a whole lot of assets in that monetary space, right? So then the other thing would be retention of fans at the racetrack. So case in point. And let's even talk about owners here. Sorry, I'm going to vent a little bit, but we have this wonderful horse, Kisselot, which I've mentioned on the show several times. So we go to Saratoga and we get a box. First time this ownership group has owned a racehorse, first time they have run a racehorse. We get a seated table for 12 people. We sit down, we eat, the bill comes, we pay the bill. They had asked me when I had organized the table to put a card on file. And then they said, so I said, okay, so the card's just to kind of hold the table. They said, yeah, it's to hold the table and, it's for the table. And I'm like, okay, makes sense. And then we pay for food. Yeah. I have a $396 charge on my card that I put on file to hold the table for the group. Then I asked, I said, well, what's this $396 charge on top of what we paid for food? Well, that's your seating charge, sir. I said, seating charge, really? An ownership group has invested money, has brought themselves to the racetrack, is paying for your overpriced food at the racetrack, is putting money into your business, and you're going to charge them $33 a head just to sit? So that's Nairo. Okay. Now we go to Keeneland. Same group coming to Keeneland, free seating. You just have to pay for their food. So when you give people an experience where they have a great experience, they will come back. When you give a marginal experience, there's a lot better things to do in the world. So I think personally, we have to up our game when it comes to customer service. We have to up our game when it comes to the media we put out for people, because the biggest thing is our viewership of our sport is what it is. It can always get better. We can't just always chalk it up and say, well, it was better than last year, or it was better than the year before. Constantly have to strive to improve and be on par with everybody else. But the worst thing is, Jim, if I took you and said, Jim, I'm going to bring you to the races today, and you can come sit with me at a table, and then I hand you a bill afterwards saying, hey, this is what you got to pay for. It's going to leave a really good taste in your mouth, isn't it?
Well, you did invite me to a table this summer, and you didn't hand me a bill on the way out the door. So I was very appreciative of that.
Yeah. So I mean, but
on their customer service.
Yeah. So what are your questions? I mean, what are your thoughts? Are there better metrics you think could be utilized to help judge the health of the industry?
I mean, I agree with you. The viewership on television is, that's probably where you're going to get a good sense right now to see what the mainstream interest is. People aren't going to the racetrack anymore,
right?
Because you don't have to. Of course, Keeneland, Saratoga, Del Mar, they get the attendance because they're those, boutique meets throughout the year that people want to be physically present at. But, nobody's going to Aqueduct on a Thursday or Friday.
If you want to catch pigeons, it's a great place.
Yeah, right. I mean, I like Aqueduct, and I make a point to go there a couple of times over the winter. So, but it's me and 50 other people. But I think that retention is key. I've got a handful of friends that like to gamble on sports. I've brought them to the track a handful of times, whether it be Belmont, Saratoga, Monmouth, but trying to get them back is like, I've got to convince them. They haven't been hooked by it for whatever reason. And I think a lot of that comes down to the education around it. They want to go knowing that they're not just going to be pissing their money away, shooting darts at the tote board. Whereas, sports betting kind of computes better in their brain because they understand it. They're educated on it. But I think horse racing kind of fails to incorporate that educational aspect so you can be a new fan, show up, and almost embrace the learning curve rather than, be totally intimidated and turned off by it.
Well, and it's interesting, if I said it to John the other day, and I would be the worst at understanding how to do any types of bets out of win, place, show, or exactas and trifectas and superfectas. Other than that, I have no clue. Like, I mean, if you said, Mike, set up a pick six, I wouldn't even know what to do. Like, I know I'm like, okay, I got to pick six winners, but I wouldn't know like what to tell the clerk. So even for a guy who's been in the game 18 years now, I've never been a gambler. I've always been a horseman. And people used to ask me, do you bet on your horse? I say, no, it's a big enough gamble to actually be a racehorse trainer. I don't need to waste money as well. So, understanding that for somebody who's been in the game, I don't even know where I would go to look, right? I know John puts out videos on betting with Don during Saratoga. And I know that, they have handicapping seminars every now and again, but I would not know where to start, even for a seasoned individual in the sport. So that's a problem to begin with, because if I feel that way, somebody else, and luckily, there's been times where I've run into new people and they're like, well, what does this mean? I'm like, well, bay means brown horse with black markings, right? It's got a typically black mane and tail, and there's black points on its legs, or chestnut is that color, or gray is this color, like simple things. So everybody in racing now, most of us, now that it's 2022, have websites, which didn't come around until maybe the last 7-8 years. But it's, as we have these wonderful things where we could actually upload videos, if each track had a fan education section to where you have tutorial videos, you know how amazing it would be for people to say, hey, you know what, I don't know how to bet, but let me click on there, and it's, oh, how do you structure a pick six ticket? Or how do you bet a trifecta? Or what does box mean when you say box a trifecta? Simple things to give them information, because let's put it this way. Pickleball is kicking our ass, okay? Fastest growing sport in America. And it was developed literally because a guy was on vacation and was with his kids and had a wiffle ball and ping pong paddles and a wiffle ball and a badminton net, right? And that's how pickleball started. And now LeBron James is buying teams. You're seeing it on ESPN. Like, it's a big growing sport, and yet we can't even get educational videos on a website to help display the sport. So a lot of it, and you're saying it right, we need to have content. You could Google YouTube videos all day long. You're not going to find a whole lot. I have guys who come into the sport all the time. Where can I learn more about the ins and outs of ownership? And I said, look, let's have like 10 4-hour calls, and I'll tell you everything. And then even once you own the racehorse, you're still going to learn something new, because there's just so much to it. But at least intro level, right? Basketball is simple. There's a basket, you put the ball through the net. That's number one. Horse racing, simple. Jock gets on horse, goes around track, winning horse wins. Okay? Number one. Then it's, well, some shots are worth 2 points. Some shots are worth 3 points. There's a team on defense. There's a team on offense. You don't need to know the plays that all the players are running, but at least you have to have that understanding, right? And so even with the difference of what's a claiming race, what's an allowance race, what is that type of information is golden, because people, when they become a part of something, want to learn. And as they learn, they become more interested.
Yeah. And I had a friend that I brought to Saratoga over the summer, and I sent him the past performances PDF, and he was like, this looks like hieroglyphics. I can't make heads or tails of this. He's like, I know what the speed number is, but beyond that, just totally guess it.
I apologize for R2D2. That's my text tone for my wife. So all of you who just heard R2D2 screaming, that's her, and not in a negative way. I think she's cute like R2D2. So
yeah, so I think, having those base level educational videos, I think would be fantastic, because it is like, there's so many layers to it. Like you said, with your NBA analogy, what are the basic mechanics of it? How do I place a bet? But then how do I choose which horse I'm going to place my bet on, so I feel like I have some bit of control over this?
Yeah. And I mean, I think the simple thing, and Jim, maybe as a project, we make some educational videos, but I mean, first step would be, we know horse goes around racetrack and first horse finishes first wins. Okay. So that's number one. That's the easiest thing to explain. Number two, surfaces, dirt and turf. Number three, distances. Okay. Number four, understanding what distance that race is that day. Because if nobody looks at the top of the page and sees this circle that has a black mark and it says, oh, that's 6 furlongs, or the black circle goes all the way around, that's 1 1/8 or 1 1/16, nobody's going to know the distance of the race. So then you take that information and then you look at the form and say, oh, well, this horse who's, the 4 horse, he's won 3 races at 6 furlongs, but he's never won when it's 1 1/8. Well, today's 1 1/8. Okay. Small things which get people to understand the extreme basics. More than likely, unless it's Kiss a Lot, a horse that's never ran a mile and an eighth, that's running mile and an eighth for the first time, is not going to win. Or if he's won at 6 furlongs, which Kiss a Lot won once at 6 furlongs, I think. If they've been winning at 6 furlongs, the likelihood, unless it's just a great horse that's in Baffert's barn, that horse is going to go from 6 furlongs to a mile and an eighth is not likely. But at least people understanding that, it'd be like watching the Olympics and Usain Bolt has been running, but you have no idea what distance he's ever run. It's just like, this guy runs and this is the time. And it's like, oh, cool. Okay. But now he's in the marathon. You'd never bet Usain Bolt in the marathon, right? He's gonna cave. People understand the Olympics because when it's on TV, and this is one of my larger gripes with racing, okay? When it's on and the Olympics are on, people are actively explaining what is happening right in front of you. You are being educated while you are being entertained. In racing, we consistently talk numbers, figures, bets that I don't even know that you're talking about. Well, it's like Colonial Downs last race, right? Well, in the super high fi, or I don't even know if they do that at Colonial Downs. So, but stuff that nobody would know, number one. And number two, you could be talking about, hey, look, on a grass track, you tend to look for these types of horses. And Maggie does a very good job at Naira TV on at least giving some of that information. But the more we put out there, the better people will be educated as they are entertained in our sport to understand the mechanics and the working pieces. Because numbers, and this was my biggest fear with FanDuel. Okay. And I know everybody's like, FanDuel is going to bring in a whole new audience and it's going to be amazing. I turned to Dominique. I said, guaranteed. It is just a bunch of numbers on a screen. And what happens? I'm sitting there watching a race one day, and then it goes picture in picture, showing 2 to 3 races at once. Well, all I want to watch is the friggin' race that's right in front of me at the track that I'm at. While at the bottom of the screen, there's MLB betting numbers running across the screen. It's like, what am I? Am I at a casino? Like, I want to watch the sport of horse racing without feeling like I'm constantly in this, Rain Man scenario where all I'm thinking of is numbers and figures and whatever.
Yeah. The most of the content that's getting created is not novice and beginner friendly. It comes with an assumption of some more advanced level of knowledge to grasp the concepts that are being talked about, being shared. There isn't like a simple pathway to get you from first-time horse player to that advanced person. There's no easy avenue to get that quality, simple, easy to digest and understand information. It just doesn't exist.
Well, and it needs to start because literally, I watch races. I don't even watch racing channels. I refuse to, for the most part, unless it's kind of like, Naira TV, Fox Sports does a very good job. So I'm more apt to watch something like that. I think NBC does a phenomenal job at the Breeders' Cup. And I believe they also are covering, they've got the Triple Crown series as well. So when I watch that, it's interesting because I am learning a little bit. It's still missing the mark slightly because there's still a lot of, this is the fluff, this is the outfits, this is this. What initially drew me to racing, and I might be completely the anomaly in this scenario, but the stories. Like I loved in 2000 and pre-2000, and you can look this up on YouTube and watch Breeders' Cup races, 2000, pre-2000 coverage and post-2000 coverage. They talk about Tiz now being in the race and certain horses, and they talk about what he was like as a foal, what he was like on the farm. You'd build a sense of an attachment to an athlete that you're watching if you're a first-time individual watching that race for the first time, which gave you a rooting interest in that individual. Most of it now is you have no interest because there's no way to connect. It's a horse. Most people don't work with horses anymore. Most people don't get around by horse and buggy anymore. There are a few people in Pennsylvania that still do, but for the larger part, nobody gets around on a horse anymore. So there's a big disconnect between understanding what's happening right in front of you and understanding that each of these horses has a unique personality and has a very unique story. I mean, I love sports movies. I bored Dominique to death with putting on like, hey, let's watch Hustle on Netflix. Like, this is really cool. And then, and that's just, yes, there's NBA players in there and they've mainly made up that movie. Or the other day I watched the Disney one. And yes, I watch a lot of Disney, of Antetokounmpo, right? And how he was born and how he entered basketball and how he became who he became and what his family was like. Like, that gets you really to feel what a person's like and builds an attachment to where you want them to succeed. And I think the more we do that and the more we get, hey, why don't we go back to when Latruska was in Mexico? And what was she like down there? And what's some footage of her races in Mexico? And what was it like when she and her trainer, who, I've spoken to him, he speaks very little English. What was it like when they first came here? And let's paint that story, because that's a gorgeous storyline. And there are so many rich storylines in our sport that just nobody knows because nobody asks the right questions. And then nobody knows what to do with it once they get the coverage.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, that's how you kind of build a rooting interest in the horse and the connections of the horse. And, the sport is full of those great stories. You just need to ask the questions or, ask the right questions, I guess.
I mean, if you look at social media animal stars, right? They don't have, it's their owner talking for them, their owner creating a persona for the animal, but people like it, right? Yeah. People like it. Here's this dog that every time he drinks his water, he dumps his water bowl on his head. So we're going to show him in all different environments, how he tips his water bowl over, whatever it is. I mean, there's all sorts of dog Instagram profiles with massive followings, but those animals have been given a personality. Our racehorses and all animals have their own personalities. And that's what I love about animals. That's why I decided to work with them. Horses all have very unique personalities. I mean, I could tell you, Kiss-A-Lot's a fine example. That horse is like a pony half the time. He is super, super relaxed, really easy to work with, very intelligent. You put a rider on his back, he's still good. You put him on the racetrack, and all he wants to do is go as far as he can, as fast as he can. He enjoys what he does so much that when he hits that racetrack, he transforms. And then as soon as he walks off the racetrack, he's back to being just this happy little horse that you can pet. I told the ownership group, I said, you're fortunate, because not many racehorses are this nice. Most of them are going to try and bite you. They won't want you around them. You can just sit and pet him. And you feed him peppermints, and then he gets a little spoiled, and then he demands peppermints from you, and doesn't want your attention unless you have a peppermint for him at this stage now. But, there's that. There's so many, I remember a great horse I worked with called the Tin Man in California, and he was so attached to the rider that he had that one day she had taken a brief vacation, and he was ridden by somebody else for a couple weeks. And at Del Mar, where we were stabled, Mandela's barn has temporary stalls. So, it's not wall to ceiling. There's just kind of boards, and then it's a stall. So all of a sudden, Crystal, who is the rider's name, comes back, and it's her first day back. She came in the afternoon before she was due to work, and he hears her voice, and quietly, you're just hearing like straw rustling, and it's like, what's he doing? And then you look. He keeps rearing up to look over the top of the boards to look where she is. And then he comes down. He rears up again, and he looks and comes back down. He looks again, he does it again. And she's like, oh my God, he's looking for me. So she runs around, goes in his stall, pets him, loves him. He loved it. But he was just a really cool horse to be around. He was very attached to certain people, enjoyed them, had a very unique training program in certain scenarios. All that stuff adds up. And then you're like, hey man, this horse is really cool. I want to follow it. I want to bet it. I'll buy hats with his name on it. I'll do, I want to be a part of his fan club. Hell, I'll create a fan club for him. All of that creates the extra parts of racing in any sport, right? If you knew nothing about an athlete who played a sport, you just saw them play and they went home, you knew nothing else, it'd be pretty hard to want to follow, especially if they only played for like 6 months.
Yeah, right. I was going to make a joke and say, yeah, and then, he runs 4 times and then you never hear from him again.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, look, that's why, Jim, you do such a phenomenal job behind the camera and, trying to show what the sport is for people who can't see it. And that's really why we do this show. And today we try to do a little bit of a different format, but, we want to educate people. We want these to be resources for people to listen and learn. And if you're an expert in the game, to maybe understand a new piece that you didn't know before, or if you're a novice, to say, hey, and John says it in the show, my Twitter handle, is at Michael S.R. Wilson. Shoot me a question. I'm happy to answer. Like, the one thing I love about this sport, and I have people all the time, because I'll spend 3 hours at the barn with somebody just showing them a horse, and they're like, thank you so much for your time. I said, no, it's a pleasure. I really like showing the horses to people, helping them connect with the game, because in the afternoon, it's started and over with within, A, the race is less than 2 minutes, and B, by the time you get into the paddock, by the time the race is over, 17 minutes. So, the morning and experiencing these horses for what they really are is really where you get to connect with them and see what they're like.
Yeah. Anybody watching, shoot Michael a message on Twitter. I think that's what I did.
Yeah. And look, now he's the best cameraman in racing. We're waiting for NBC to give him a call, but we're getting him there.
Yeah. Well, I know we've been kicking around some ideas between ourselves here. So maybe a lot of these feature stories, so people can get to learn more about horse racing in general and learn more about specific horses and the people behind them. We'll start to see those stories come out pretty soon, I think.
Well, and for people who don't know, and Jim's not going to tell you, but John and I already aired it out. Jim is going to be at the Breeders' Cup with us on the grounds. And we are going to do our best job to try and get you behind the scenes and in-depth stories on all these Breeders' Cup horses and what's going on. So if NBC doesn't do a good enough job to get you there, we'll try and do our best job to get you there. So, tune in, stay tuned to Pass the Wire. And, thanks so much for watching this show. We meandered a bit, but I still hope that it was fun for all of you who tuned in.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, Jim. Thank you for coming on, my man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you next week, and hopefully John will be back with us. I feel a little bad. I sent him like a castaway thing, before the storm, because I didn't realize he was going to be in the eye of it. I thought he was in like West Palm Beach, and I sent him the scene where there's the volleyball floating away and he's screaming Wilson, and then I said, oh my gosh, that might have been the scenario. So but John is alive and well, for everybody wondering. He's just waiting on power and electricity. So anyways, thanks so much, guys, and please tune in next week.
Tracking trips with Pick Six King John Stetton. It's one of the best tools in horse racing for any level of player. It's your second set of eyes, spotting troubled trips, betting angles, track trends, horses to watch and favorites to fade, 10 figs, ticket structure, and more. At Tracking Trips, you're a friend with benefits. Not a member? You must hate winning money. Join Tracking Trips now. Visit PassTheWire.com and we'll see you in the winner's circle. Remember, nobody does it better.
Nobody does it better.